Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Renee, and I welcome you to the library this evening, and welcome to those who are watching the program via live stream as well. If you would, please note the feedback forms that are on the back table and take a moment to share your thoughts about the program. Your feedback helps us plan for future events. Today's talk is the second in the Your Mind and Health series being presented by the University of Arkansas Department of Psychological Sciences. We have a flyer on the back table as well that lists out all the programs. Each are being recorded and will be viewable on the library's YouTube channel. The next program will be on November 17th, and that will be about avoidance and anxiety. Tonight's presentation is an overview of understanding human behavior. What drives our behavior, and why do some behaviors last while others quickly fall away? It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Lauren Quetch. Dr. Quetch is a licensed clinical psychologist, an associate professor in the Department of Psychological Sciences at the University of Arkansas, and an associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics at UAMS. Her research and clinical interests are with families of autistic youth, youth disruptive behaviors, families with intersectional marginalized identities, and neurodiverse, affirming, and culturally competent mental health care. Dr. Quetch, thank you for being here. I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Renee. Hi, thanks everybody. So yes, we're going to talk about understanding human behavior today. I can't promise that we're going to figure everything out today or understand all choices in human behavior, but I'm hoping that you walk away with some useful information. So let's see if I can there we go. So I guess the point of this is trying to figure out why we act the way we do, giving you a little bit more information and insight into your own behavior as well as maybe others' behavior, right? So just as Renee kind of gave an overview, we're gonna really think about how do we make meaningful behavioral change and try to break it down in a way that feels a little bit more understandable. So we're going to do some definitions today. We're going to do a little bit of practice on our own and maybe in groups at the end, hopefully if we've got a little bit of time. Okay, so have you ever heard of the saying, everything happens for a reason, right? Yeah, well, yes, we know this, Well, obviously, and if you're a behaviorist or someone that studies behavior and tries to understand it, right, they would argue that, okay, not everything happens for a reason, right? There's certain things that are out of our control. However, of the things that we can't, sorry for the feedback, of the things that, there are certain things we can control, and one of those things is our behavior. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means and what specifically we can control. Okay. So first, we're gonna do some question and answer. I'm trying to engage you a little bit, all right? What are some things that we do? You can just say it. Avoid. Oh, thank you. We do have a graduate student here that is gonna give us some. Yes, I love it. We avoid things, yes. What are some just verbs? Give me some verbs. What are some things we do? Walk, yes, yes, 100%. Yeah, we had walk, what was it? Someone else said. Yell, yes. Play, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so these are just easy ways, right? These are behaviors. These are things that we do. The tricky part is, how do we figure out ways to categorize our behaviors and know what to do with them? So for maybe yelling, is that something that we want to do? Maybe not sometimes. Let's think of some other behaviors. What are some things that maybe we like to do? Laugh, yeah. Maybe that's a goal. We want to laugh more, yeah. What are some things maybe we don't like to do? Exercise, great. Yep, okay. So the interesting thing, right, is as we start to break down behaviors, we're going to break it down a little bit more. Some things we have to do, some things we like doing, some things we don't like doing, right? But for those behaviors that we end up doing over and over again, we're going to try to understand the reason why. Why is it that even if we don't like something, we keep doing it? It kind of makes sense if we like something that we're going to keep doing it, right? Okay, so in order to best understand how do we even break this down, we are going to start with our ABCs. Yes, ABCs, all the way at the beginning, right? So all of our behaviors are defined by our ABCs. So we have A, which are our antecedent. We're going to break these down one at a time, so don't worry. So an antecedent is what happens before. So that's kind of the question. What happens before? The behavior. B is our behavior. So we'll talk a little bit more about like, okay, we say yelling, we say exercising, we say laughing, but what does that actually mean? What does that look like, right? We needed a little bit more definition about all of these things. And then C is a consequence. So what happens after that behavior, right? Okay, we're following, right? We're following. So I think the best way to try to understand and unpack our ABCs is to kind of take our ABCs out of order. So the first thing that we're going to do when understanding why we do the things we do is talk about our behaviors. Okay, understanding our behaviors. So if we want to best understand why we do something, then we need to define it. And so some things like, what does it look like? What's the intensity of it? So when I say yelling, how often, when, in what context? Only with certain people? Only in certain situations? Is it only when I'm driving? Right? When is it happening and how is it defined? So I work a lot with little kids and parents will come in and say, oh, my kid, they just have these big fits. They throw tantrums, right? And in my mind, I already am thinking, all right, this means they're on the ground, they're screaming and crying and yelling, right? Maybe with people that have had little kids, you understand this, what I'm talking about. However, everybody's definition of this can look very different. So a kid could scream for an hour. Whew, that's a long one. A kid could scream for 5 minutes, right? Or maybe even a couple seconds. But that could be a tantrum, right? So we need to best understand how, like, what's the intensity? What does it look like? How long does it last? A tantrum could just be yelling. It could be hitting, right? It could be biting. It could be screaming. Oh, it could do all of those things, right? But we don't know, and we don't know best to how to address a behavior until we've defined it really well. Questions so far about any of that? Does that make sense? Okay, we're going to do some application, I promise. All right, so the next important part of not only defining that behavior is understanding that our behaviors serve a purpose. So I think a lot of times what happens, especially when people come in for therapy, is they say, I want to change this behavior, right? Or I've tried all the ways to change this behavior. And you're like, great, what have you done? And they're like, I just tried to get rid of it. And you're like, well, if it worked, you probably wouldn't be in here, right? So the issue oftentimes that I find with people is that they don't realize that their behavior, even if they're mad about it, even if it's not great in their lives in the long run, it serves a purpose, right? We have to acknowledge that it's serving a purpose. Because if we try to eliminate a behavior without understanding what purpose and what role it actually serves for us now, all of our attempts at changing a behavior aren't going to work, right? So there's a few things. You can get into more details about this. There's more specifics about it that you could really, if you, as you're unpacking your own behaviors, understand like what role does this serve in my life. But these are just kind of some overarching ideas about how behaviors serve us. So one is serving our wants or needs, right? So this could be something really easy like hunger or thirst, or it could be for like kids sometimes and adults, a need for attention, right? So I need this. This is part of me being a person. It could also, thank you Forrest back there, it could also, what could happen is that we are using this behavior to escape or avoid something. So I'm making a choice, for example, maybe I cancel my plans because I'm really nervous about running into somebody that I really don't want to see, right? So I've chosen not to go out or not to attend something because I want to avoid it, right? That's our safety mechanism. We're like, I don't want to do that because it's going to protect me if I don't. And then there are some things that are just immediately enjoyable, like smelling a flower or something, right? So there are some things you do it, right? And immediately you're like, oh, that's bringing me joy right now. Yeah. Does that make sense so far? Yeah? We're thinking about it a little bit. All right. And then, of course, you have behaviors that serve multiple functions. So understanding it could be immediately enjoyable. It could also serve a want or need, right? It could be all of these things could be happening at the same time. Okay. So now, this is where we're going to try. And you can ask me questions if you want to too. But I want you to think about a particular behavior. And we are going to stick with this for the sake of learning over the course of the next however many minutes. I want you to pick a behavior, and I want you to try to define it in your head. So think about one particular one maybe that you want to change. This could mean you want to increase it. This could mean you want to decrease it. So it doesn't have to be, I only want to get rid of something. It could be like, I want more of something, or I want to do more of something, right? And I want you to try to understand how you're defining that and then what purpose it serves. And if you want to, you can chat with your neighbors if you need a little bit of help. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to think of something for a second. Do we feel like it's easy to pick a behavior? Do we feel? No? No, it's hard. Are there too many to choose from? Okay. Well, just, is there one that feels more tangible, potentially, than another one? Yeah? Okay. Maybe think of that one. Think of something, and it's like, it doesn't have to be life-changing, right? You're like, I want to change everything. Well, maybe not today. You're just one thing. And for the purposes of the exercise, that might be easier too. Okay. All right. So everybody had a chance kind of to think about a behavior, maybe? Okay. Do you find it easy to define it? No, maybe. So thinking about when does it happen? So sometimes what we do when people come in for therapy is we say, if they have a goal, right, then we think about have them collect some data for us, because you are the greatest experts of your life, right? So I need you to go out and I need you to track if this is a certain behavior that you want to address. I need you to go out and track what that behavior is. When is it happening? And what ends up happening is you gain a lot of information from just tracking that behavior. And the coolest thing is research shows in this area that sometimes behavior can change when you just become more aware of it. So when you start tracking your behavior, actually your behavior can change because you are more attuned to it and more aware of it. So I suggest if this is something that you're really interested in, just start tracking when it's happening. And the more details you have on it, the easier it's going to be to sort of problem solve these other components of behavior. And sometimes you define it, you track it, and it changes. So that's really cool too. All right. So now I was trained in a program in graduate school that was very big into behavior. And they thought everything was predetermined because behavior is always, there's a reason that it remains, it's predictable. And so they would always say like, future behavior, the best predictor of future behavior is what you've done in the past, right? And this is why it's so hard to change behavior, because when you fall into those patterns, we sort of just habitually do the things that we've always done, even if it's not happening in a way that we want it to, right? So when we talk about behavior, and a behaviorist would say the likelihood that a behavior will happen, because it's not always guaranteed, the idea is that it is shaped by consequences. So what are consequences? Let's talk about them. We have, these are more complicated than this, but just trying to take it in bite-sized chunks here. So we have something called reinforcement, and you probably heard of that before, yeah, maybe. And maybe for those folks that have taken the intro psych class, this is also very common knowledge. But the idea with reinforcement is that when it happens after that behavior, right, it will increase the likelihood that that behavior will happen again. So, I can go somewhere and someone gives me an ice cream cone, I'm gonna be there again. I am a sucker for free food. So that would be a reinforcement for me. Now, not all behaviors or not all consequences are going to react the same for all behaviors. It's not gonna react the same for all people. It has to be reinforcing for you, right? So it's just because it works for somebody doesn't mean it works for you. Similarly, with punishment, it's the same idea that it's changing the likelihood of behavior, but it's decreasing that likelihood that that behavior will happen again, right? So if I put my hand somewhere and I get snapped by a mousetrap, probably not gonna wanna do that again. That was unfortunate for my hand, right? So that's the idea, reinforcement and punishment. It's only the idea that it will increase the likelihood of behavior or decrease the likelihood of behavior. And this is important to note because some people will say something like, oh, I'm punishing. So again, I work a lot with children. So parents will say like, oh, I'm punishing my child, but that kid's behavior doesn't change. It's like, that might not actually be punishing, right? So if that behavior is still there, we haven't actually decreased the likelihood it will happen. That means it's not actually maybe a punishment, right? Okay, we'll table that for a second. Okay. So there's a lot here. I will try to talk about these, not in too much detail because I don't want you to get sort of like bogged down with all these definitions, but there's a lot of different ways that we can be reinforced. There's a lot of different things that can serve as reinforcers for us. So I've given some of these here, and I'll go quickly through them. But you can have primary reinforcers. So these are things like a favorite snack or a drink. So like I said, with the ice cream cone, maybe I get, every time I do my hour-long walk or something, I stop at the very end, I get an ice cream cone. Oh, fantastic, right? Social reinforcers might be like hugs or high fives. So if you don't like being touched, probably not a reinforcer, right? But if you're like, oh, I love a hug or I love a high five, then that would be like a social reinforcer. A tangible reinforcer is going to be something that you can hold, right? Something that's meaningful to you. So I had a little kiddo that I absolutely loved that I saw and loved new shoes. So mom was like, I'll get him to do anything. I'll just buy him a new pair of shoes. And I was like, that's great. Maybe not sustainable. But that was very much, he was like, yes, shoes. I want new shoes on everything, right? So anything you can hold, though, that can be like a tangible reinforcer. Activities or privileges can also be reinforcers. So access to something that we really like. So maybe I do something and it allows me to travel to my favorite place, right? Or maybe I love going to the park, and so that's something, when I do something, I go to the park and I get access to that. That increases the likelihood that I'm gonna do that behavior again, right? Also token reinforcement, so think about like your Starbucks or like whatever little gift card that you have, and you earn your reward and you go there and they give you points, and eventually you keep coming back and you earn those points, and eventually you're gonna get your free coffee, right? So that's the idea here. It's not necessarily immediately reinforcing or directly reinforcing, but there's something that you're earning that goes toward something else that is maybe like one of these reinforcing, right? It earns you access to that. Okay. So you don't need to get bogged in these details, right? You just need to know that something's reinforcing, and it has to be powerful enough, a powerful enough reinforcer so that that behavior will increase in the future. So if you're trying to problem solve about how to make something more reinforcing, you have to think about, is this powerful enough, right? Especially maybe the behavior is really challenging or hard, right? So is it intense enough for me to continue it, or is it reinforcing enough? All right. Okay, so similarly, punishment works in a similar fashion, except, right, the idea is that we're decreasing, not increasing the likelihood of that behavior. The interesting thing, though, is a lot of people that are in the field of behavior and study behavior in general would say that punishment oftentimes is not enough to change behavior. So if you think about dog training, it's like human behavior, animal behavior, very similar in this way, right? Like if you're dog training and all you do is correct your dog and you don't tell them what to do or praise them or reinforce them with those little, sometimes people have those clickers or like a little piece of bacon, right? If you don't have that too, the dog is just going to be like, I don't know what to do. All I know is I keep doing things wrong. People are the same, right? Like if all you ever do is get punished or told what you're doing wrong, it's really hard to know what to do right. You kind of feel helpless or hopeless. So that's an important note as you think about your own behavior and behavior change. Maybe just punishing it isn't enough, right? And we have to understand what the purpose of that behavior, what purpose that behavior is serving, right? Okay. Are we still following? Okay, great. I see a lot of head nods. Good. I was a little worried. I was like, I don't want to be too jargon heavy or too in the details, but I think having enough of this information so that you can apply it to your own behavior is really important. Okay. So if we're thinking about a behavior and we're thinking about, all right, I'm punishing that behavior, I'm trying to reinforce a certain behavior and for it to grow, you have to think about, is there something else I need to replace that behavior with? Now, not all behaviors require, I note this right here, not all behaviors require a positive opposite behavior. However, I think this is helpful if you are trying to get rid of a behavior to think about, well, what could be in its place? Because again, we have a gap here. If our behavior is serving a purpose, what can be replaced so that I can still have that purpose fulfilled in some way? So we're going to give some examples. This requires your participation. All right, so our undesirable behavior maybe is snoozing our alarm, continually snoozing our alarm. So what would our desirable behavior be? Getting out of bed, waking up. Yes, I love it. I love it. So sometimes when I work with parents, I say, it's like, they're like, not snoozing my alarm. And I'd be like, yeah, but no. Because you haven't actually replaced it. You just did the thing that you were trying to avoid doing, right? So now we have to say, like, what is it that we want to do? That's the idea of the positive opposite. It fills the gap. So I'm not snoozing, I'm standing up, I'm waking up, right? Great. Okay, so jumping on furniture, that's our undesirable behavior. What would be our desirable behavior then? Yeah, sitting, yeah, right? Maybe we're not jumping, maybe we're sitting. So I give this example because I do this a lot with my families, with little kids. So they're saying not jumping on furniture. No, that's not going to get you there. You have to, because if you say something like stop jumping on the furniture, that kid could then take the chair and throw it, right? And you're like, ooh, well, I didn't like that either. And now we have more negative attention on that kid. Yeah, we're giving them a lot of things that maybe, a lot of opportunities to do things that they shouldn't be doing. So let's instead focus on what we want to do, right? And then we can replace that behavior. All right, this is our last example. So someone had said yelling earlier, right? So maybe our undesirable behavior is yelling. So what would be our desirable behavior?
Using an inside voice.
Inside voice. Yeah, right? Fantastic. Okay, so now we know. Now we know what we mean by positive opposites. So if you're saying, I want to replace that behavior, right? Or I want to get rid of that behavior. This is the purpose it fulfills. Let's replace it with something else. What's that positive opposite? Okay, we're really in the weeds now. So I believe in you. We're gonna stick to this together. We're gonna do it. All right. So what are other things that might impact how strong or how effective our reinforcers, our punishers might be. First, and again, guys, I have to tell you, when I was in graduate school, they made me pick up rats, and we had to study the behavior of rats just to prove, like, if I did this just at this time, how's that rat going to respond? I'm not going to make you touch rats. This is the main part, and the main thing that I learned from touching rats, and I accidentally dropped a rat. It was a whole thing. It's fine. I don't have to do that anymore. So the idea that I learned from that was that sometimes it's how well a consequence is linked for a behavior or how close it is linked to a certain behavior. Does that make sense? I promise we're going to apply this in a minute. So it's not all vague. It's all very applied. Okay. So if we have a behavior and then we have a consequence, if it's immediately next to that behavior, it is more likely to be more powerful. It's also more likely to be associated with that behavior. Does that make sense? So if my consequence is kind of far away from the behavior that I did, it's going to be a lot harder for you to associate that behavior and that consequence. Okay? Well, I'll give some more concrete examples of that in a minute. Okay. Also, if it feels like the consequence really has nothing to do with that behavior, it could also be harder for you to link those things together to realize, oh, I did this and that was the consequence of that. Okay? So if you are not necessarily tracking your behavior either, and you aren't realizing that, oh, me doing this leads to something else, it could be hard to realize that if those things don't seem like they're clearly together. Does this make sense? So like, it's very clear if you're not snoozing that alarm, you could be late for work. You know that the amount of time that you have to get ready is directly associated with how late you slept, right? Versus like, maybe something else unrelated to work at the end of the day is also a consequence of you not delaying that. It could be harder to tie that with your snoozed alarm, if that makes sense. Hi, buddy. All right. Another aspect of this is there are multiple consequences that could be acting at once, right? And some could be immediate, but some could be in the long run. And this is why it's so hard to change behavior, because we as humans, as creatures, are more driven by those immediate consequences, right? So if I go for my walk and I get my ice cream cone immediately afterwards, heck yeah, that's reinforcing. I love it. I love ice cream. But maybe my long-term goal of getting fit isn't happening if every time I go for a walk, I'm eating a big old ice cream cone, right? That's the long-term consequence of my decision. Doesn't mean that you can't have an ice cream cone. Like, I'll take you up on an ice cream cone. The idea, though, is depending on what your goal is, right? Depending on that behavior that you are trying to target, you need to be thoughtful about both the long-term and the short-term consequences of that. Does this make sense? Okay. Okay, I think I covered all that already. So maybe we have a goal of having more meaningful friendships. That's a long-term goal. That's a long-term thing that we want. It's easier, just similarly like what I talked about earlier, it's easier to immediately cancel plans with your friends because you're too tired or you don't feel like getting dressed to go out. Right? So that's your goal. My goal is to have more meaningful friendships. My behavior then has to be what? I have to go out, or I have to call them. I have to spend time with them. So yes, and immediately it's easier to cancel those plans, right? Versus in the long run, that's what you want your behavior to be. So it's making those little choices along the way that this is uncomfortable. It's not immediately reinforcing for me to stand up and get dressed. I was in my comfy pants, and now I got to put on my uncomfy pants, right? Like maybe it's not immediately reinforcing, but in the long run, it's serving that purpose of spending more time with our friends and then getting more meaningful friendships. Yeah, we're following? Okay. Okay, are we digesting this so far? I feel like it's a lot to take in. There's a lot of components of it. I promise we're going to apply some of these things too. Okay, another component of that is consistency. So here is my example. When I came up with this, I felt I was like, if I gave this to my undergrads, they may not understand this anymore. Like many of the analogies that I give now, I'm like so slightly embarrassed that I'm like, oh, I think I'm being relevant. And they're like, no, not reliable anymore. So there used to be, kids, vending machines where you actually had to feed the dollar, and now you can just swipe your card. It works, it's great. But when there used to be those snack machines, like to get chips, right? What did you expect when you put that dollar in? That's actually very fair, very fair. Yeah, and then you scrape it on your leg or on the corner, and then you put it back in. But the idea usually was you put that dollar in, you should get chips or soda or whatever it is every single time, right? So what happens if you give it the dollar and it eats it? It eats that dollar, you don't get your chips. Depending on who you are. You might try again. You're like, dude, I'm so hungry. Please, please, just and sometimes it gets stuck in there and you're like, if I could just shake it, right? But the idea is, okay, maybe you try it for a second time, but are you gonna keep trying it? We're not losing $3 to this thing over time, right? You are expecting that if I give it $1, I should get my snack. Why is it different than when we feed money into a slot machine? We can pop in coins all day, and we're not necessarily expecting to get a snack out, right? So we may not win the jackpot every time, but maybe the jackpot is a whole lot bigger, and it promises a whole lot of stuff. That's a big reinforcer, even if I don't get it every single time or never, right? Versus this might be smaller, but it's consistent, and I'm expecting it every single time. So another aspect of consequences is also, what do we expect to get, right? What's our expectancy of our consequences? How frequently do we expect to get those consequences, right? And that can alter our behavior too. So they did the same thing with rats and a little lever, and what you find out is if they occasionally get reinforced with their favorite pellet when they're starving, they will keep pressing that lever, just like we are no different than rats sometimes, which is a little sad. But in that way, right, if we are getting a snack every single time, just like the rats, just like those pigeons that I had to work with too, if they expect it every single time, that behavior is going to stop pretty quickly when they stop getting those pellets. Versus if we think maybe we're going to hit the big time, maybe we are going to do something more. We're continually doing it, but not necessarily getting that reinforcement every single time. Okay, so based on your behavior you picked earlier, I want you to think about some of the consequences, right? So can you think about, based on that one thing that you selected, can you think about the immediate consequences? So if I do this behavior, this is the goal behavior that I have, what's happening immediately afterwards? Is it like a little bit of reinforcement? Is it no reinforcement, right? I'm doing it because I have to. Think of taxes. We do this every year, right? And yet we still have to do it because maybe we're a little worried about the punishment. It seems kind of big and scary. Or maybe there is a little bit of reinforcement. If you file your taxes, you get some money back, right? So think about what are the immediate consequences and think about what are some long-term consequences. So think about, you can chat amongst yourselves too, talk to your partners if you want. And then think about what potentially are some reasons, what are some of those consequences, right, that you continue a behavior that you want to reduce, eliminate, or don't even enjoy. All right, let's think about that. You can talk amongst yourselves for a second. anything, buddy. It's my cheerleading crew back there. Those are my kids. All right. We feel like we've got some sense of this, a little bit of like immediate consequences versus long-term consequences. Thinking about it, we're thinking about it a little bit. We're thinking about what are the intensity, what are the intensity of the consequences, right? Maybe they're just a little bit versus really intense, right? Okay, we're thinking about some of those things. There we go. So now I'm going to give an example. I don't know why. I must have been hungry when I was making this. I had a lot of examples about food in here. I'm talking about ice cream. Now I'm talking about Oreos. Okay, so we're going to say Sandra, our person, wants to stop eating Oreos every evening. So if she has a cookie, she punishes herself by not watching her favorite show the next evening. Okay, but she's still eating Oreos after a few weeks. I want us, you can shout out to me. What are some things potentially you think are getting in the way? So we've talked about behaviors a little bit. We've talked about the consequences. So let's think about that a little bit.
There's no positive reinforcement.
Yeah. Oh man, what's an Oreo? But delicious, right? Immediately reinforcing, right? Yes, very satisfying. And then that's why we have an entire sleeve, right? All right, what else? What else are you seeing potentially kinks in her plan?
Timing?
Timing. Someone said timing. Yes. It's pretty delayed, right? Yeah, it's pretty delayed. Also, like maybe the not watching her favorite show, is it like really punishing enough? And it's so far away and like, I don't know. Like, is it even connected? Like, are we connecting it well? Right? I sometimes see this when parents are doing like punishments for their kids, and they're like, "Oh, you can't go to your friend's house in a couple weeks," and it's like, that kid forgot. They forgot. They forgot that we were supposed to go to their friend's house. They forgot that like it was because of this original thing that happened a couple weeks ago. Like, if it's not well connected, we're not tying that behavior. It's not going to necessarily serve the purpose that we want it to, right? Okay, anything else that you're thinking about here?
A replacement.
Yeah, right? So maybe she's hungry, right? And this is like, and I have some of these things on the next slide too, but like maybe we'll go back to that in a second. Maybe we're thinking of like, the purpose of it is that I'm hungry and I need something to eat. This just happens to be available. So if we are not considering what purpose this serves, then maybe we're not going to be so successful. Okay. You probably generated, not necessarily that you said these out loud yet, but you probably are thinking about, yes, there's things that can impact the effectiveness of our consequences, but there's probably some other stuff that's getting in the way or increasing or decreasing the likelihood that we're going to engage in certain behaviors, such as our antecedents, right? So these are the things that are happening before the behavior, right? So if the behavior is eating Oreos, right? What are some things that are happening before? So in that example of Sandra, maybe waiting until late in the evening. So maybe I had lunch pretty early in the day and I haven't eaten, and I'm telling myself that I don't need an Oreo, but I'm really, really hungry, and I don't feel like cooking, and I'm starving, right? So she hasn't eaten. She needs to eat something. So purpose, we need to eat. Another thing, right, is she's just keeping Oreos in the house. It's going to be really hard to stop eating Oreos if they're there, especially if we love our Oreos, right? So if we are setting ourselves up in such a way that we make them readily available, it's going to be hard to avoid it. So this is why antecedents play an important role too. So when we think about it, antecedents can sort of be like our prevention strategies. And so there's a big list here. I'm going to go through each one of these. So if we think about like what can we do ahead of time to set ourselves up for success, these are sort of our tools for that. So first, certain situations or people. Maybe we realize that there are certain people that make it harder for us to achieve our long-term goals, right? Or the behavior that we want to keep doing over time. So, maybe it's you don't want to smoke anymore, but you got a whole lot of people around you that are smoking. It's going to be really hard to quit smoking when you get the smell of it, right? Or if they're like, oh, just one won't hurt you, right? Like, oh, you're fine, right? And it's going to increase the likelihood that you're engaging in that. Certain situations can do the same thing for you if there are certain environments. There also could be other people that are encouraging you to engage in that behavior that you want to engage in, right? So thinking about, are there certain people I lean on? Maybe we've had these people in our lives, like maybe you ask a certain caregiver, like your mom or dad, for help with something, but not the other, because one's actually a little bit better and encourages you a little bit more than the other one does, yeah? Maybe sounds familiar. Another aspect of this is controlling the environment. So for Sandra, stop having Oreos in the house. Man, just cut it out. It's going to make your life a little bit easier. Maybe not immediately reinforcing, right? But we have to think about, how do we change the environment? How do we alter it in a way that leads us to be successful? So I had some friends that would talk about, like, it was really hard for them to get up in the morning to go to the gym, and so they were like, I just either set all my clothes out in the morning, or I knew someone who was dressed when they went to bed, so they would just roll out of bed and be like, I don't even have to think about it, let me just go, right? I was pretty impressed by that. But that is a way to alter your environment. Okay, you can also do things in small doses. Just because you want to get to a point where you are doing something for a long period of time, think of, I don't know, if you want to do an Ironman, you're probably not going to start by running a full marathon or swimming several miles, right? Or biking however many hundreds of miles there are. You're going to start small. So in this same way, if you have a goal of changing a behavior, can you start with a small chunk or a little bit, and you can build up over time, rather than having this really big goal and then you fail and being like, well, I've proved to myself that I couldn't do it, right? So how do we do it in small bits? And so for sometimes when I talk to caregivers, they're like, oh, I can't take my kid to this event. It's too long. They just can't sit still for that long, and so they just never get to play with their friends. And it's like, well, actually, could they be okay if you just went for a period of time? Like, you don't have to commit to that full 2 hours. Can you go for like a half hour? And maybe the kid gets to interact with friends, and you don't feel so bad about isolating them, but we know that after a couple hours, they're just going to kind of melt down. Okay, another aspect of things is, can we change the order of events? So maybe, like my friend who would get dressed to go to the gym and then just pop up so she didn't have to think about it in the morning. Is it harder, like if you're saying, like, I really want to exercise more, so I'm going to do it after work. Is it harder after you've had a long day, a lot of things gotten in the way, you're tired, someone yelled at you, and you're like, I just can't, right? Or can we switch it, and can you try it in the morning, right? So it's not that you have to abandon your goal, but can you alter when you do it, and does that allow you to be more successful too? Maybe you don't have to skip out on the Oreos. Maybe we just have an Oreo after we've eaten our dinner, right? Rather than saying you can't have it at all. But maybe we're mostly full now, and now we're not eating the entire carton of it. Okay. Another thing to think about is responding to the early signs of a problem or behavior. So this is where it comes in handy to have that behavior very well defined. So if we know when it's happening, we know the intensity of it's happening, if we can see patterns of those things, then we can actually be more aware of early signs of it, so we don't wait until we are deep in a hole or having a really hard time. So if the goal, like someone said earlier, yelling, if we are getting to the point where we're screaming at somebody, maybe I need to check myself earlier on so I'm not at the point of no return where I'm just yelling at maybe Sandra now. We keep throwing Sandra under the bus in this example. Okay, so another example would be like, okay, so maybe I'm waiting until I'm hungry, right? I'm hangry at the end of the day, and I'm challenging myself to do something that's really hard that requires a lot of my brain, right? It's gonna be a whole lot harder if I'm tired, if I'm hungry, if I haven't addressed some of those factors, right? And I'm not gonna be as capable and alert of trying something new, right? So maybe if I can say, okay, I recognize earlier on that I'm starting to feel kind of drowsy. Maybe I recognize earlier on that today's not the day for me to try this really hard task for myself, maybe I can sort of address it earlier rather than jumping into it and continuing to have that same problem. Okay. Another way that we can be thoughtful about certain behaviors is changing how we ask or respond. So in one of the interventions that I do with little kids, there's research to show that if you ask a kid to do something versus tell them to do something, so would you sit your bottom in the chair versus sit your bottom in the chair, they're actually more likely to comply when you just tell them to do it than when you ask. So even changing the way you phrase something increases the likelihood that you're getting what you want as a caregiver. And this way too, if we're thinking about, okay, we're trying to achieve something, right? Or we're trying to do certain behaviors. If we can do a better job of practicing these certain things when we're calm, so then we can utilize that skill in another moment. If we get ourselves to that point, then maybe we'll be more successful when those times are hard than I'm going to try this brand new strategy of not yelling at someone for the first time when I'm actually very, very upset, right? Okay. Another, and I've mentioned this a few times too, but also addressing setting events. So that would be things like sleep loss, illness, hunger. Again, some days maybe it's like, you know what? I haven't slept. I'm not feeling so good. Maybe today's not the day that I do this big thing. Like, that's okay. And recognizing that of yourself. But maybe it's also, do I need some caffeine to help me combat this fatigue? Do I need a nap, right? Do I need a snack? And maybe I feel a little bit more alert, right? Addressing those things that help set you up for success, because yes, toddlers need these things, but so do adults. If we can address these things, maybe we're more likely to be successful in that behavior too. Okay, and this is the last one. So we all need reminders too. Sometimes we forget what our long-term goal is. Sometimes we're too busy with a lot of other stuff that we're just kind of reacting in moments. So also being thoughtful about the amount of times I put reminders in my phone because I just forget things otherwise. That's okay. I've had clients before that talked about, being with this sort of partner that was not good for them. And they talked about like, the dopamine hit of them calling and saying they want to get back together, right? It was so reinforcing. And it was really hard to remember their long-term goals of like, and they were unkind to me and this way and that way. So having them write out a long list about why they were not with them anymore and they'd set it right next to their phone. So if their phone ever beeped with them on it, they could just pull out that list again and be like, remember. Long-term goal. Not this person, turn it off, right? So that can also help too. Maybe we need just notifications, maybe we need some sort of like self-reflection, but can we have some sort of reminders to help us get closer to our goal too? Okay, so now that we know all these things, what are some of prevention strategies? What are some antecedents possibly that you could use with that particular behavior that you're trying to change? And remember that change is hard, right? So there could be a lot of things that you're having to rethink about because it's uncomfortable, right? Or I really do have this goal, but I'm going to have to alter my life in significant ways. So if this is important to you, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's an easy fix, other times it requires more effort. So if you're like, I really do want to cut smoking out, but a lot of my close friends are smokers. Knowing this information, it's gonna be really hard for me to avoid this. So is there something else that I need to do? Do I need to spend more time with other people that don't smoke? Do I need to figure out how in the world I can overcome this smoking sort of smell in my senses that is driving me in that moment? That's really hard. Doesn't mean it's impossible for people, but just some things to think about. All right, I'm gonna give you just a couple minutes because we have a few more slides that I wanna make sure we get through to tie it all together too. So think about antecedents. Think about what are some preventive strategies. I love this problem solving. This is great. This is awesome. So I think we've done this a bit already, but I wanted to make sure that I gave you a little bit of extra time too to think about this all in context. So you can talk with your same neighbor, you can talk to other people, but I want you to really think about it now that you've kind of done it in chunks now. So what happens when we just define that behavior very clearly, when we think about what's happening before and what's happening after, and whether it's increasing something, decreasing something, eliminating it, I want you to think about it all. And the wonderful thing, this is why therapy is really helpful, because if you're like, I really do feel like I've tried everything, you've got someone else that can help you sort of think out of the box. So it's really helpful to have friends and socialize to problem solve some of these things too. So I want you to, again, spend a few minutes, and I'm going to put this up here too, to think about, and it could be the same behavior, it could be something else if you want, but chat a little bit all within context to figure out, if I have tried it, why isn't it working, right? Or maybe I haven't and I want to try something new. What happens if it doesn't work, right? I want you to think about all these different scenarios and try to set yourself up for as much success as possible. And remember, if something's not reinforcing enough, right? If something isn't punishing enough, it's not going to change. So sometimes it's not a matter of just changing one thing, right? Maybe it's trying to change multiple things, right? Can I have multiple consequences, positive consequences? Can I have a punishment and a reinforcer that are happening at the same time? So increases the likelihood that I'm going to do that again, or decreases the likelihood that I'm going to do it again, right? All right. I'm going to give you a few more minutes, and then in the last few minutes too, if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I can come around, I can just stay up here, but I will let you look at this for now and chat. All right? Go ahead.
I get a little treat, and I figure since we're like
I just wanted to save a minute if anybody wants to ask questions. It's about 7, so I don't want to keep anybody here. But I just want to thank you. I'm happy to hang out if anyone does have questions they want to ask me. But thanks for coming. Thanks for participating. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.